يعتدون علي ويرمونني بالحصى.
Let's have some questions for Miko. Yes.
So she was talking about Ahad Tamimi, who's from Nabi Saleh, from Palestine, 17 years old, who just celebrated her 17th birthday on the 31st of January in an Israeli jail cell. I'm sure many, if not all of you, saw the video of her kicking and slapping Israeli soldiers that invaded her home and invaded her space. And it's probably one of the most watched, probably the biggest story out of Palestine in a very long time. This courageous young and very beautiful young woman who did what I believe, who acted as what I believe is how every father would hope his daughter would act, faced with not just several men, but several fully armed men who invaded her home and her privacy, and was not afraid to push them out and at the end slap one of them. Of course, this rocked Israel, and everybody said, you know, how could she get away with slapping an officer? And so it was a very courageous move. It was very moving. She's been in jail for 6 weeks now. She was supposed to, her trial was postponed already. Her trial was twice. I was in Palestine just recently, spent a few days with her dad, who's a good friend of mine, Bassem Tamimi. And hearing after hearing, she was denied release for reasons that nobody could understand. Finally, a couple of weeks ago, when I was there, the judge explained the reason she cannot be released until the end of the proceedings is because she maintained her right to remain silent and would not speak. She wouldn't even give the interrogators her name. So because this young lady, who hasn't even finished high school yet, knew that she has a right to remain silent and maintain that right, the judge punished her and said, you will remain in jail until the trial. The trial was scheduled for the 31st of January. It was postponed till the 5th of February, and now again it was postponed again to the 13th. Her mother is in jail as well. And Ahad is probably looking at 1.5 to 2 years in jail, and her mother maybe a year, 6 months to a year in jail. Now, you know, her family, her home has been invaded hundreds of times. They've lost more than 20 family members that were killed by the Israeli forces over the years. So we're talking about, you know, we're not talking about some spoiled kid who did something rude. We're talking about an incredibly courageous young lady who did exactly, well, like I said, I have a daughter who's a year younger than her. I would hope my daughter would have the courage to do, or the ability to do. Now she's in jail, and I think what you're talking about is sending letters to her, to the jail authorities, to the prison authorities in Israel. And I will say one other thing about this really briefly. I believe that the fact that she had to face those soldiers points to our failure, points to our cowardice. Because the world, she did exactly, she should not have been in a position, no young girl, no child should be in a position where they have to face armed soldiers who invade their home and their privacy and their land. Where were we? Where was the world? Why is the world afraid to stand up to Israel where this young lady had the courage to do? So her courage really points to our lack of courage and our lack of action and our need to step up our game. So the question is, you know, as you know, Barack Obama commuted the sentence of Chelsea Manning, and why did he not commute the sentence? What did he have to lose? And really this is a question many people ask. He was a 2-time president. He's a very rich man. He's got nothing to lose. He could do the right thing at this point, right? I believe that if he commuted the sentences of 5 convicted Palestinian Muslims who were convicted for terrorism charges, no Democrat would ever be elected to any office ever again. That was the fear. The fear is that the Israeli lobby, the ADL, AIPAC, and all these other tentacles of the Israeli, the pro-Israeli groups here in the United States would make life absolutely hell. That would be the end of the political career of the Democratic Party. If you're accusing me of being rational, then you know, I feel that the proper emotion to deal with this issue and you're right, it's all about the issue. The issue here, the big problem is Zionism, is rage. Rage. When I heard this story, I know personally, I know her father, but all the Palestinian prisoners, the issue of Palestine, the only proper emotion, I believe, is rage. It has nothing to do with being, I am very rarely accused of being rational. I think you cannot look at this and not be emotional. But it's a kind of rage that I would hope would get us to move and act. Now, we're not talking about coming to a point where we negotiate with them. Nobody negotiated with whites in South Africa. They were brought down on their knees. And they were down on their knees, they gave up. Then they gave de Klerk the Nobel Peace Prize, which, of course, is a terrible thing, but that's the way it goes. They need to be brought down and they need to be brought down on their knees and quickly. Then they will surrender, I believe, like the whites like apartheid in South Africa. So I think the rationale, the reasons for being rational is so that we're all on the same page, we and everybody we know. But I believe I'm driven by emotion to do this. I'm completely driven by emotion to do this, and I try to contain myself. I'm not always successful, but I do try to contain myself a little bit. But I agree with you. It's not about sitting and explaining. It's about BDS. It's about pointing to a reality that has to change, and it's not about them liking it or wanting it.
Yes.
I wonder if there's any detail that you came across that has to do with that supposed secret meeting between George W. Bush and Ariel Sharon in December of 2001.
Yeah. Yes, it came up a lot. Ariel Sharon was visiting the United States and met with George Bush shortly before this announcement of the closure came about. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but many people expect that this came up, and that the closure of the Holy Land Foundation was something that Ariel Sharon was requested and presented to George Bush, and then George Bush did it. Now, one of the things I do in the book is I look back at what took place in Palestine. In other words, the way the Israeli authorities had dealt with the Holy Land Foundation offices and their operations in Palestine in the years preceding, leading up to 9/11. And it's obvious that they wanted them shut down. They were closing them down, they were harassing them, they were disrupting their operations there, very early on. And we also know that pro-Israeli groups here in the United States, like I said, since 1993, were working to discredit them and so forth. So I can't say for sure if this actually took place, but the assumption is, and it's not an outrageous assumption, is that it did come up at the meeting, and this was a result of a request made by Ariel Sharon. I believe there is you look into the local BDS chapter, or the closest BDS chapter, and you put together a campaign, and there's, like you said, there's so many targets. I think, the call for boycott, the call for BDS was a gift to all of us from Palestinian civil society. Telling us, here's what we need you to do. So you can join a campaign, you can look at their website and so forth, but all you really have to do is go to a store and not purchase anything that's made in Israel. That's already an act of resistance. The next step, which I would encourage everybody to do because it's not that hard, is go to the store manager or the department store manager and say, you should not be selling this because there's a call by Palestinian civil society. And then start a letter campaign and start a campaign to make sure that this particular store does not sell these products anymore. You know what I mean? And you repeat it and repeat it. It's not that hard to put together a campaign like that. You get a few people involved, and there you have a campaign. So it's probably the easiest form of resistance with which anybody can participate, and then you up the level if you want to get more and more involved. But like you said, there's so many targets here in New York, and clearly anything that represents the state of Israel, there has to be a crowd outside. There has to be people out there, protesting that. Absolutely.
I think there are representatives here of good organizations that have been working on this issue for a long time, like Al-Auda and Samidoun and JVP and SJP. So I would really coordinate with the local organizations that are here. Could you read some questions?
Yeah, the question was, number one, how I heard about the case, and why, other Americans don't know anything about it, even if they grew up in New Jersey, where this was a big deal. And the other part is, can an Israeli visit Palestinians if he's not a lawyer or anything like that? The first part, I heard about the case. I happened to be in Dallas giving a talk. It was just before the General Sun came out. And the SJP group, among the SJP group that was there that organized the event, were two daughters of these guys. And they came up to me after the event and told me the story, which I thought was an unbelievable story. And then in the audience was another activist who was an alumni who came up to me and he said, well, if you want to know more, I'm involved with this case. And he started sending me court documents and all the information. So that's how I became aware, completely by chance. Completely by chance. And then I chose to look into it and investigate more and more and more. And then I decided I wanted to write this book. So it was completely by chance. That's an excellent point. Local and state officials, elected officials, and the local and state laws that are being passed against BDS activism, or particularly boycotting Israel. So I'll tell you a story. I lived for many years in a tiny little city called Coronado, which is adjacent to San Diego. It's got about 20,000 people. City council members are kind of volunteers. They get elected, but it's, they have a job. It's not like a big deal. And one day I get an email from one of them who I knew, and she said to me, look, we got all of us, all the city council members and the mayor got this invitation to go to Israel. It looks amazing. What do you think of the itinerary? And she sent me the itinerary. And it was a dream trip. A dream trip, wonderful trip, helicopter rides over the Golan Heights with some general and, traveling around the country and all paid for and wonderful. Now, this is a small city, the city council members are not politicians or career politicians, they're just people who want to, help the city look good. And you think they're investing, what is it, $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 per city council member to bring him on this junket to Israel. Why would they do that? Well, because the assumption is that they might go further along. They might become, they might run for state office. They might run for national office. They start that low. And I hear this city after city after city, whether it's a big city or a small city, this is happening across the country. We're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars invested in getting local and state politicians on their side by offering this great trip. The end of the story is I said to her, would you like me to really tell you what I think? And she said yes. And so I told her what I really think. I told her all the things she's not going to see. The apartheid laws, the oppression, the thousands of political prisoners, all the things that we know. And then at that particular city council and that particular mayor all decided not to go. And they said, well, it's too big of a gift for a public official, so it would be wrong for us to go. Consecutive ones had gone, also from the bigger city of San Diego and from Coronado, had gone. But this is incredibly important because I think they need to know, the local and state officials need to know, elected officials, that there's a call for boycott from Palestinians. It's legitimate, it's dedicated, it's persistent, it's the right thing to do. This is exactly along the lines of what Helena was saying with the call to boycott South Africa. And they need to heed the call. They need to listen to this call. And if they don't, then you won't vote, they're not going to get your vote. And I think, you start small and then you build a coalition around that, and that's how you get it happening. But I think talking to local and state officials is incredibly important. And when they do go on those junkets, they need to get visits, or when they get the invitation, usually it's public, they need to get visits, and they need to get letters, and they need to get phone calls telling them not to go. And when they come back, they need to get visits, and they need to get more protests telling that they should not have gone. So this is a very, very important part, I think, of the campaign.
Yes.
Perhaps America's foremost dissident, Noam Chomsky, as far as I know, doesn't support BDS. And though he does support Palestine, maybe this isn't the case, but What is your take on it? Is there he's constantly talking, is there some talk where he reveals an alternative or where his position is clearly false? What's your...
Well, I can't say specifically for Chomsky. I've not had this conversation with him, but I will say decidedly, clearly, without any doubt, that there is no solidarity for Palestine without BDS. It's talk. You cannot support the cause for justice in Palestine without BDS. It's just talk. Whether it's a government, that pretends to like Palestine but does billions of dollars worth of trade with Israel, or whether it's activists, whether it's Chomsky or anybody else, you cannot. Saying that we support the Palestinian cause, saying that we support the cause for justice in Palestine without supporting boycott is nothing. It's meaningless because it's just talk with no action. So I, categorically say here, and I say it all the time, saying that, talking about solidarity without BDS, without boycott, is a complete waste of time.
I think on that high note, we should wrap this section up. And thank you all for turning out. And thank you, Miko, especially for writing this book, for doing this tour.